You write at one point that only 1 in 3 students is, quote, highly engaged in school, and that the reason is not just technology, it's that they don't see the point of school. And when I read this, my first thought was, well, as kids growing up in the 80s in suburban New York, we didn't necessarily see the point of school either. What changed?
I mean, you're right to acknowledge that the sort of genre of the disengaged teen is long and storied. You know, we all loved Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It
Yeah.
was a classic for a reason. It resonated with us. I would say disengagement levels are not dramatically different. The outcome and impact of that disengagement is so much worse than it was before. The workplace didn't require what the workplace requires now. Critical thinking, collaborative problem solving, powers of discernment with, 10 gazillion fakes out there in the world, new skills, digital literacy, AI literacy. The world is demanding more. So being disengaged means that it is harder to then kind of turn up and suddenly be engaged and be competent and be able. You could do that before. Employers not that long ago, the main skill they were looking for was literacy and numeracy. That is not what they're looking for anymore. The world is a lot more competitive and a lot more sophisticated. The cost of that disengagement is way higher than it used to be. I would say the second thing that's changed really dramatically is the resilience of kids themselves. So kids don't feel okay in the system in a way, and there are multiple reasons for this, but mental health stats around young people are very alarming. And so we have to sort of ask the question, what's driving that? What's going on? And, there is a group of people who will say it is all the phones. And I'm very grateful for the work that, those people are doing. People like Jonathan Haidt really raising the alarm bells. And very supportive of a lot he's saying. But I think the way kids feel about their experience in school, which is where they spend a lot of time, is also has a very profound influence on how kids feel about their lives. So we always say, and you referenced this earlier, how you feel about learning affects how well you learn and how you feel about yourself as a learner, which is kind of a key competency in the world. I can navigate the world because I can learn new things. I can do new things. I can kind of adapt and change. You need that sort of fundamental adaptivity. And that, you build that through being engaged. And so, again, I think you're right to say we've seen this movie before, but you haven't seen the ending before, is what's changed.
There is a theory that teens these days are increasingly disengaged in school and that it matters far more than we think. What kind of a learner is your child? What kind of a learner were you? Does it really matter? Well, my guest this week is Jenny Anderson, and she thinks so. She's the co-author of the Disengaged Teen, a toolkit for parents of checked out and stressed out teens, aimed at getting them engaged in their own learning as well as in their own futures. Anderson is an award-winning journalist for the New York Times, Institutional Investor, and The Atlantic, to name a few. She's also a mother of teens herself. On today's episode, we're talking about whether things are any different now than they were, say, 25 years ago, and why Jenny and her co-author Rebecca Winthrop say phones are not the only thing to blame, not by a long shot. Whether your kid is a resistor, a passenger, an achiever, or an explorer in school, there is a lot more going on that they are showing you. And we have a lot more influence, this is the good news, than many of us think. What led you to this field of study?
Sure. So I actually covered finance for almost 20 years as a reporter at the New York Times and a bunch of other places. Really fast paced, wonderful group of people, covered the financial crisis. And then I had my kids, and I had always in my free time kind of voraciously read about sort of parenting and human development. And I was this is the stuff I love. And these are the questions I have and I want answered. And so I did a kind of radical pivot and really wanted to cover how kids became who they become. And so I covered education, which was great. I really loved it, but I found it a very limiting beat. We're covering sort of the politics of schools and sort of unions and charters. And to me, I wanted to know about teaching and learning. And honestly, the question I was interested in is how you become a good learner. What are the things that contribute? Is it how much of it is family? How much of it is environment? How much of it is school? How much of it is experience? How much of, is kind of the classic nature versus nurture, but like sort of raised to the 19th degree. And that was I quit the New York Times to join a digital media startup that was going to let me do that. And I did that for 5 years and just loved it. And then Rebecca came and said, hey, you're doing all these articles, they're great articles, but, this is actually a really important hole in the market. Like, we don't have a book about how to support kids to be better learners. You're writing about the science. She had done extensive research, both in family, community, schools engagement and in leapfrogging. So she said, I sort of have the systems level thing. You have the storytelling thing. Shouldn't we do this thing and kind of offer to parents a way to help guide them better? And I do love the topic so much that I thought it would be worthwhile diving in for, what I thought would be a year and was 3 years.
As it tends to be, but no good deed goes unpunished. My first question is, why does the learning disengagement of our children even matter?
We tend to think that sort of grades are the measure of learning, right? And the truth is they're not. Grades don't necessarily, they're often some kind of weird concoction of grade inflation plus effort plus participation plus, which are all very important. But it is hard to get a measure of sort of mastery and competence through grades. And the truth is that when kids are engaged, they perform better, they feel better, and they are more pro-social. So it's a better kind of gauge of whether our kids are getting the things from learning that we need them to be getting. So good grades are very important. I'm not in any way discouraging those, but they're not necessarily a metric that tells you, is my kid learning to make their way through the world in a way that's setting them up for success on the other end? And if you think about what you want, well, I'll speak for myself, what I want for my kids, I certainly hope they get good grades, but I also just want them to be able to sort of participate in the world, be critical thinkers, be productive, be able to struggle with things and persist with things, to be able to dig in and ask questions. Like, those are a slightly different set of skills than what sort of tests and modern schooling are asking of us. And so when we think about engagement, it's, do you show up? So life is showing up. Do you participate actively, right? Are you cognitively engaged, and are you thinking about the stuff you're doing? Are you just sort of totally zoned out? Are you trying to sort of shape your learning to what you care about and what you're interested in? When those things all happen together, kids are supercharged, and that's why we should care about engagement.
When you take a disengaged teen, perhaps, and you draw the through line from that to maybe then they're also not so social, and then maybe they're watching social media and deciding they're ugly or not ripped enough or what, I don't know, whatever nonsense these kids are telling themselves, when we all looked the same at their age anyway, right? And then they grow up and then they go into the world, and now the story has been reinforced so hard that they are not a main character in their own life, that they are a spectator. That how can they overcome that now, right? It's like they're wiring
Yeah,
their brain.
there are not enough opportunities for them to sort of be gaining the skills. I mean, there's a real kind of, you again, going back to the sort of feeling thing, like, you kind of know when you're improving at something, right? You can feel it, and it is motivating. And not doing things and procrastinating is not motivating. And so sort of leaning in early and trying to find ways to help kids figure out what they care about, not just jump through a bunch of hoops because they've been put in front of them. Like, that is a skill that some kids can do very well, but that is not the skill the world will need of us. Like, that is a compliance skill, right? And so I'm not saying, don't do the work, but that is clearly not sufficient, right?
No.
You need some internal drive. You need the ability to push through hard things. I think that is, like, if I had to draw the number one thing I would hope young people would have opportunities to learn, is that a lot of things are hard and you have the ability to push through and get through it. And with that belief and the ability to adapt and engage, I kind of think we'll all be fine.
Oh, I mean, listen, that's the goal of life, I think. But it's interesting because you're drawing the connection between disengagement in school and how you end up feeling about yourself. So this idea that parents send their kids to school and think if they're getting good enough grades, then all is well with the child is insane to me, because I will be parenting my children until 10 years after I am dead, personally. But you make the point in the book that parents have more impact than they think, which I agree with, and I don't think people are saying it enough. One strategy you mentioned for inspiring engagement in particular got my attention. What is wise feedback?
Wise feedback is a set of interventions that have been developed to really help set high expectations, but offer the level of support that is going to help a child to meet that high expectation. So I think a lot of us as parents struggle with, we all want to expect a lot of our kids and we hope that they achieve a lot. That is a very natural thing to want because we think that sets them up for success in the real world. And it does, right? Let's be honest.
And we believe they
But we
can
don't
do
want
it.
to put such high expectations that we're debilitating them, right? Like it
Yeah.
is a very competitive world right now. We cite David Yeager's work here, and the study is really a group of students were given feedback on an essay. So lots of red ink on an essay, way pre ChatGPT. So lots of feedback on their essays. And a separate group was given a lot of feedback on their essay, and both groups were given the opportunity to revise their essay and get a higher grade. So the problem with this, and this is a problem time eternal, is that most kids don't take that opportunity. They don't take the feedback. They may not even read the feedback. But the change in one of the conditions was one group of kids got a little note from the teacher saying, it had 14 words, and I'm not going to get them totally right, but the gist of it was, I'm giving you this feedback because I have high expectations, and I'm here to help you if you need it. And so the idea being is, I believe in you. I also get that you might need some help. And I've given you all this feedback for a reason. A lot of kids interpret that feedback as criticism, which is very normal for teenagers. They interpret it as this teacher doesn't like me, doesn't think I'm competent, doesn't think I can write very well. Meanwhile, the teacher's like, oh my God, I've taken all this time to give you this incredible feedback. So there's this real mismatch. And so these wise interventions are meant to sort of break that feedback loop and say, hey, I'm giving you a ton of feedback because I know you can do better. And I'm cheering for you. I'm rooting for you. I want you to do better. And significantly more of those kids who got that note revised their essays and turned it back in and got a better grade. And honestly, what they're learning in that process, it's not even really the grade isn't the outcome. The grade is, if I put in more effort, I will improve. Again, really important life lesson, right? Like the effort isn't like, yay, you get a trophy for showing up. It's, hey, this is hard. This writing thing is hard. But if you put in the effort, you're going to get better and the results are going to get better. That's really powerful feedback loop.
And that effort matters, not just results. Because there's a lot of like, well, I
Yeah.
got an A. Well, but how hard did you work? And I find myself doing this a lot of the time, wanting to remind myself that I'm supposed to say, oh, you must feel amazing. You worked so hard. That's what I'm supposed to say, right?
Yes and no. I mean, I would say it's a little more nuanced than that.
Yeah,
I
kind
guess
of.
it's actually also really simple. You don't say that if you don't mean it. And you don't, because they'll know. Kids have epic bullshit detectors. And
They
so
do.
I think what we're trying to convey is like, what's the thing you want to instill in them? Do you want to instill in them that you love them because they got an A, even though you don't mean to? That I think a lot of us do that. Or do you want to instill in them that you recognized, I see how hard you're working. It's like, it's intense, but this is good. These are life skills. You are preparing for something big and important. The outcome, I have faith, will be what it will be because you're putting in the work. But like, wow, look at you. Look at you go, right? That is, she needs cheering. She needs feeding. She needs reminders to sleep. But she needs to know that that work is worthwhile, right? It's gonna, even if it doesn't, I mean, she will want it to pay off in the grades. But if it didn't, in my mind, I'm like, you did that thing. You nailed it. I wrote a piece about Carol Dweck, who coined the phrase growth mindset. I interviewed her sort of, gosh, in 2016 or 17. And she was very concerned because growth mindset had gone off the rails because too many people were saying, oh, you tried so hard. That's great. Yeah. And if you try hard, but don't actually put in more work or develop some strategies to improve, it is the self-esteem movement all over again. And we don't need that. It's empty. If you want improvement, the message isn't you tried hard. Actually, that message to kids is often heard as, I don't think you can do that much better. Oh, you tried so hard. Well done, you. It's almost patronizing. Wow. But it's like, hey, you put an effort. It didn't work. We need some new strategies. Let's figure those out. What are we going to do now? Right? I bet you can improve. There's a subtlety there, but that authenticity from us as parents is incredibly important. They can read us
for
so
sure.
well. And so if you say, and I'm not saying you didn't mean it, but I'm just trying to give your listeners some tips here, which is you can't just say it. You do actually have to mean it.
Like that's just good in every. It's
Totally.
good when you call a girlfriend and you say, um, "I love what you've done with your hair." She's gonna know too if you're lying, right? And it's interesting because as you're talking, I'm thinking, remember when we were growing up and our parents never told us any of these things, and somehow we survived? It just keeps going back in my brain where I'm like, it
Well,
is a different
my
world.
mother was like an acolyte of the self-esteem of. I had a self-esteem
Really?
bear that when you squeezed it, it said you're awesome. Yeah, no, I was like, in my household, it was all self-esteem all the time. And I don't think it was helpful. I mean, everyone's doing the best they can. I'm not judging the choice, but I think the outcome of that is, Eliza Preston said this beautifully once. She said, I grew up with so much applause and I went out into the world looking for the applause.
Oh, well,
Who
yeah,
thinks I'm
yeah,
wonderful? Who's
yeah.
going to cheer for me? you know? And I think that's pretty
First of
powerful.
all, I want a self-esteem bear because I think at 47 I have earned it. So if you can find a link and you can just send that to me, please. I need a self-esteem bear. Um, Otherwise, I'm gonna have to keep just waking up my girlfriends in the middle of the night and being like, "Am I still pretty?" But I love that, and I
That's
also
what
love that you
girlfriends
have
are
the right
for.
perspective. Right, I know, but they also need their sleep, right? We're all in perimenopause, and they get pissed off when I text them. But it just goes back to how much people put themselves into their parenting and they don't realize that it's the lens they're
Yeah.
going through. And you at one point counseled in the book, oh, this was a sentence that got me. You you counsel parents that disengagement is not an disengagement is not an individual act of defiance by the child. Do you think a lot of parents actually believe that it is or feel that it is?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah,
That's
yeah. Because
shocking to
that's what it
me.
looks like.
That's shocking
Oh,
to me because I
yeah. No, I
think
think if
kids
your
are
kid
little
is choosing not to
potatoes,
go to school,
you know?
especially as your kids get older into their teen years, I think it is very easy to look at them and think, wow, they look sophisticated. They at times feel so sophisticated. They are, making conscious, rational decisions where in many instances it's more a complicated set of emotions that are leading to those behaviors. And sometimes, but I think, the judgment of many parents to their kids who are disengaged in school is quite confrontational. And I think it comes from a place of fear
Yeah.
and love. I really do. But I do think it is definitely feels like defiance.
Annoyance. I get that talking back is unpleasant. My children are very much, it's not like they don't do that, but I guess an individual act of defiance to me makes it sound almost like, and we're going into nuance, but it almost makes it sound like you're giving the kid enough credit to assume they have any idea what's happening around them and they're still a kid. I'm 47, I still don't know what the hell is happening around me.
And by the way, I love, love, love the teen years. So I'm not painting it. I'm not painting it to be a bad period, but I do think the complexion changes a lot. There's a lot more, as there should be, independence and
Yeah.
autonomy, and growing into the people they want to be and who they're going to become. But that does often clash with the adults in the building.
All right, we'll do a part two. I'll call you in 10 years and I'll be like,
Yes. Oh, that's fun.
why? That's all. I'll just
No,
cry,
it's not
you
even.
know.
I think there's a false narrative that it's all terrible. I just think it's sometimes when you parent to a phase and the
Yeah.
kid changes and it takes you a while to catch up to the
Yeah.
new phase. And you're like, oh, they can either do this thing or they're, trying to be more free, or it can be as simple as like they used to hold my hand and now they don't. It's like
Yeah.
you're the lagging indicator, not the leading indicator.
Constant. I do want to get back to the four types of engagement. It's a nice sort of simple way of looking at categorizing your child's approach to engagement in school right now. So I want you to tell me resistor, passenger, achiever, and explorer. Can you describe each one? And then can you explain for me why being an achiever can be a red flag?
Sure. So passenger is just like what it sounds like. These are kids who are coasting along. They do the bare minimum. They're showing up, so they're behaviorally engaged, but they're not really digging into the learning. They typically race through homework as fast as they can. They look for shortcuts. If they ask the teacher for feedback, it's like, do I have to write 3 paragraphs or could I write 2? Resistor mode is when kids withdraw and act out. It's kind of exactly what it sounds like. These are kids who are dubbed problem children. The good news is kids in resistor mode have agency. If you can turn it towards learning, what happens is these are kids who know how to say what I want and are willing to go after things. Achiever mode is one of the trickiest modes that we talk about. These are kids who are aiming for gold stars and everything put in front of them. They often have wonderful work ethic, and parents love them because who doesn't want a bunch of gold stars? But there is a dark side to achiever mode, which is we cite a bunch of research in the book, which shows that kids who are aiming for excellence do very well. Kids who are aiming for perfection, and there is a shockingly high number of kids who are now aiming for perfection. These kids typically have the highest mental health challenges of all of the categories, but also say they are typically not developing sort of creative thinking skills, creative problem solving, because if you're trying to get the right answer all the time, you're not actually having to think about anything other than what you need to do to get by versus sort of more open-ended, broad questions. And so it's the challenge with these kids is sort of trying to get all the good stuff without letting it tilt into the bad. And maybe we can talk about sort of some of those red flags. And then a lot of people think of achiever mode as the pinnacle of the engagement mountain, but it's really explorer mode. And this is in an age of AI, this is what kids are going to need. Explorer mode is where sort of curiosity meets drive. Curiosity has been developed and nurtured, and drive is the result of having that deep curiosity and having opportunities to explore it and having that sort of rewarded. Those two come together and kids really become unstoppable. They know themselves, what they care about, they know what they want to go after. They're resilient learners because they know if they get knocked off course, they want to get back on course because it's a course that's important to them. Achiever, when kids are in achiever mode and they get knocked off course, they often internalize it as sort of massive failure and massive setback because the system is right and they are wrong, versus someone in explorer mode really just has much more of a sense of kind of internal compass. So they are agentically engaged, which means that they are sort of proactive in their own learning, with their own learning. They're self-driven.
Yeah. Well, and so it's resistor, passenger, achiever, explorer, and what you want is explorer, but you really just need to set up it sounds like you have to set up the conditions for your child to make the leap from achiever to explorer, but you can't force it. And the way what you describe, by the way, you talk about, you say that in general, the wealthier the country, the happier its adults and the less happy its kids. And then you talk a little bit about the achiever conundrum. It sounds to me like a teenage version of the unexamined life, right? But can you explain for me, I mean, I'm just thinking about it. I'm like, an achiever conundrum is basically the definition of all these people having midlife crises at this moment, because it's not the car and the young girlfriend. For our generation, it's the midlife pivot. I'm not satisfied. Everything I did to get myself where I am here no longer serves me. And so what am I going to do?
Yeah,
Right?
it's the sense of sort of never enough, right?
Right.
It really is trying to satisfy the needs of a system without figuring out what your needs are first. The achiever conundrum is simply that something we want for our kids, which is achievement, often is very harmful to them because a lot of kids show up in learning this way. I'm very familiar with this mode personally and as a parent, and I would say my role is so different when I see my kid get stuck. I mean, we're very clear that these modes are dynamic. Kids move around them all the time, and that's totally normal, and you should be happy about that and help them even recognize that. But when they get stuck in a mode is when that mode becomes an identity. And many kids in achiever mode, because they're getting tons of positive feedback, really love this identity. They are achievers. The problem is they're very fragile. And so your job as a parent is to help them be less fragile. It is to encourage that they are not the worth of their grades. They have an identity in your mind and in the mind of your community, family, friendship group that is beyond a set of grades and a set of achievements. You love them because they talk to their grandmother every night who has dementia, and they talk to her in a really gentle way that sometimes you don't. You love them because they're a good friend to their friends. You love them because they show up for people. You love them because they work really hard at things that are important to them.
They're
it's like
ours.
really and we're just encouraging this kind of deep sense of mattering beyond achievements.
And I like that you use the term the fragility of kids in unhappy achiever mode, because that's a word that I think will spark a lot of parents to understand their kids are not okay. Fragility is not okay. Do you want fragility in your partner? We all know you're not helpful if you're overly fragile. In a work situation, when did you ever get ahead by being fragile when anybody gave you any feedback? So I love that you use that phrase, but no one's trying to make their children fragile. What do you believe most parents get wrong when they're trying to
Mm.
help their children achieve that leads to this sense of fragility? Not that it's the
I
parents'
think
fault.
they think, yeah, I don't think it's their fault. And I think it's, by the way, they're hardly alone in believing this, but I think there's a false sense that with achievement comes happiness. And I
Mm,
think, the data just that is the sort of marker of the success. So there's some really interesting data that, getting into Harvard and going to Harvard going to be the thing that makes your kids happy? Or is the experience they have during those 4 years, which is a long period of very highly developmentally interesting things happening, is it that they form good relationships? Is it that they find a professor who believes in them? Is it that they find a career path that they're excited about? Is it that they learn to dig in on stuff they really care about? They find, things that excite them. That is actually kind of the goal. And we really get it wrong in thinking that it's the institution or the
mm,
accolades that's
mm.
going to give them that versus the set of experiences that will actually set them up for success in the real world. You want your kid to go to Harvard, your kid wants to go to Harvard. Great. I mean, chances are really stacked against you. The numbers are really, really bad.
And
I
they're
know
worse
everyone
than they
thinks that
were.
their kid's different,
Yeah,
but
but they're
like, what
also
is
getting
the
worse.
cost? What will be the cost
Mhm.
to that, to setting your sights on that? And are you completely convinced that the rules, they go to Harvard, they'll be happy? How convinced are you of that? And is that a sort of gamble that you're willing to push for? So, I really don't blame parents in thinking this. There were a sort of set of rules of the game. I just think that they've changed so dramatically, right? And they really have changed kind of as we've all become parents. And when you talk to young people today, they're like, the rules don't apply. Like, we know that. They know. They're literally living and stewing among it. They know that the rules don't apply, right? There's no sort of sequence of go to college, you get your first job, you then get a house, whatever. Like, none of that. That's all
None
work
of
has
it
been thrown up
applies.
in the air. Economic certainty has been thrown up in the air, sort of what you study, So I think we just have to be kind of more open to I think sort of a slightly broader definition of success, which is sort of, do you know who you are, what you care about, and do you have the skills and sort of motivation and internal drive to go after something you care about? Because once you have that, then applied to anything, you're
Yeah.
sort of, you're golden, right? And Rebecca said the research is so compelling. Parents have just as much influence, even in adolescence, as teachers and peers. And so it's like, oh, well, we do have the influence. So what are we going to do? What are
Yeah.
we going to do with our influence, right? Are we going to convince them to jump through all the hoops, or are we going to try to help them develop a sense of what hoops they care about?
Well, and look, I went to Harvard, so I'm the first person to say it doesn't make you happy. Like you know what I mean? Like I can put that out for everyone in the metaverse. It does not necessarily make you happy. It's just college. But to
Yeah.
your other point, I remember being that age, and I remember actively rejecting what my parents were saying, but that doesn't mean I didn't care, right? I rejected it, but that doesn't mean I didn't
Also means
care.
it didn't mean you didn't absorb it. You
Exactly.
had a mechanism which was to reject it.
To
You had
reject
a
it
mechanism
outwardly.
which was, yeah, of course, but that doesn't mean you didn't, I mean, how different, I don't want to judge you and your mother, but like, I rejected everything, and I think I ended up quite similar to my mother. Like, the neurobiological imperative of adolescence is to separate from your tribe, from your caregivers, and to go find your own tribe and a mate. So
Yeah.
we do know this happens. It's so painful in the moment to be rejected by people you love so much, honestly.
Well, and it's some of the phrases that you're using are sticking in my brain. You're saying you want to fit in and stand out when you're an adolescent. And now I'm thinking I'm perimenopausal. I want to stay in and lie down. Like that's what I want. I don't want to fit in or stand out. I want to stay in and lie down. Someone cancels dinner, I am thrilled. So things change, right? In the space of 30 years.
Yeah.
But there is to what we're talking about largely, which is the effect that parents don't realize they have on their kids. Um, there's just a long tail on it, right? Whatever you're saying when they're 2 is somewhere in their brain when they're 12. Whatever you're saying when you're 15 is going to resurface when they're 25, 35, 45, right? Because now we both know our mothers were basically right just about almost every single thing.
I don't know that I want that recorded. Can we edit that bit out? I'm going to get I've been waiting to hear that. I bought my mom a tea towel that said, I always knew my mom was right. And it's like hangs right in the middle of the kitchen.
It's a beautiful thing, though, to look back on it and basically feel like, yeah, no, mom was just right. It's like, it gives a beautiful simplicity to life. And I like to hold on to that with the long tail of life as I'm raising my own kids. Which brings me to the other topic that I wanted to touch on with you. You have a section on emotion coaching.
Mm.
Without sounding combative, very simple question.
Mhm.
Why do we need to coach our children on managing their emotions in terms of disappointment and striving? Isn't life supposed to do that?
Apologize for sparring. I love it. Push back. So this is based on some really extensive research, which is that looked at how kids fared, and there's really no judgment on this. So some parents believe that emotions should be avoided because they are dangerous, or they're going to be distracting, or they're um, unhealthy, and then a group of parents who sort of see emotions as something to be managed. So the actual original research for this was done with kids who were going through a divorce. Did the parents who said, we're not going to talk about this because it's too painful, they thought they were protecting their child from something very painful. And group 2 was kind of like, this is really hard, right? Like, let's talk about that. What are you doing with your feelings? You're feeling angry. What does that mean, right? Coaching them that they have these big feelings and that you're there to help them get through them, right? Those kids over the long term fared much better. And so it feels so patently obvious in 2025 to be saying this, because we're in a sort of talk about our emotions all the time. I really love Lisa Damour's work on this, right? Teenagers have big emotions. Our job isn't to fix them or get rid of them. It's to acknowledge that they have big emotions and ask them how they want to be supported in that moment. There's this, I love this framing of help, hug, heard. Do you want help? Do you want to be heard? Do you want to hug? And it's a really nice framing, because a lot of times these big emotions that come up, very natural, we want to fix them. We want to make them go away, and I think that's the equivalent of that 1970s and 80s research is we now know that they're there, and we're not going to pretend they don't exist. We're not going to be Victorian about it, but we do want to fix everything cleanly right away and make sure that our kid isn't too unhappy for too long. And it's like, that is how you learn to manage big emotions, is going through them. But it is really helpful. Again, they're not going to tell you this, for you to be a steady presence in that, in the face of those big emotions. I'm here. It is going to pass. You are going to be okay. Like, I have confidence that we will get to the other side of this, and I'm here. Right.
Well, I like that you explained it that way, because I didn't really get that that was what it meant. It's emotion coaching to me sounds more like guiding them to understand that their emotions are to be processed intentionally, which is different than what people might assume it is, because I like help, hug, heard. You could use that in relationships as well, right? You can use it in romantic relationships.
Totally.
And men use that more with
Yeah.
their wives, right?
Yeah.
But I had bifurcated in my mind, and I had assumed that you were talking about helping them handle things that were happening outside the family. Because I felt like growing up, my family was very much there to talk about things that were in the family. We didn't ignore things, right? We talked about them. And so if it's a divorce or if it's something like that, I assume I have to talk to my kids. How are you feeling? It's okay to feel however you feel, blah, blah, blah. But if it's things that are happening outside the house, I've always had this mentality that this is for you to manage. But every day I want to know what's going on in your world, and we can talk about it. And can I help? Right? I'm not going to intervene.
Yeah.
I'm not here to intervene in the bully or in the this or the, if you think the teacher is being unfair about whatever you got in trouble in class or whatever, I'm not going to intervene unless it's an extreme situation, but I'm here to talk it through. And like, I'm curious, what do you think you're going to do about it, kind of thing. So
that is what you just described as emotion coaching. You're helping them problem solve through those emotions, right? So you've got this big set of emotions. You're angry. You think it's unfair. You think your teacher sucks. You think the grade is terrible.
And you're
Okay, I
right.
hear you,
Like, I
right?
agree.
So number one, acknowledge, right? Two, validate, and then, you know, how can I be helpful? One of the biggest changes from sort of primary school to middle and upper school is, you kind of go from this very intentional full child design. In elementary school, kids are trying to develop a bunch of skills. They're learning to be in a group. And then they get to middle school and high school, and we're like, okay, here are these domains of knowledge you need to master. It is not about sort of emotions, right? It's literally about learning stuff and performing well on that stuff. And I think the emotion coaching is saying, hey, yeah, things are going to be like really tricky at times. And so what are the resources you have to deploy? The coaching is really about helping you figure out your strengths and develop those and grow. I think
Yeah.
that's how I think about coaching.
I do want to add one other thing because I would say I'm going to use this with my kids. Do you want help, hug, to be heard, or for me to hand you a sandwich? Because sometimes you're
I mean, fed is often a really good one too. That might fall into the category of yeah, help. Help in
and like
the form of
PSA
food.
for anybody who's dealing with me, those are the four things with me too. Like helped, heard, hugged, or handed a sandwich are the four of them. So, but I really do appreciate your time today. I want to ask you this one last question because I like to get a little bit more personal insight into people. I want to know, what do you think, looking back, you most have gotten wrong in terms of helping
Mm.
your own kids stay engaged? Being the expert now, looking back, judging yourself, what have you
Yeah.
done most
Oh
wrong?
God. I mean, I think they would tell you the list is long, and I would have to concur. I am going to say the number one thing, and I think about this a lot, is impatience. I am a sort of like productive, let's get this done, let's get on with things. And that is literally not the way children work. It's not the way adolescents work. And I think if you're trying to get to something, you lose so much along the way. So it's not making space for the coaching. It's nagging because it's the easier strategy versus questioning, which is takes more emotional regulation, takes a little bit more patience, and might not have as quick an outcome, or just sort of, setting very clear expectations. So I really think I think about this a lot when I was a full-time reporter for the New York Times, and I would kind of come home at 7 o'clock from work. I'd been operating at sort of, 192% all day long.
I'm sure.
It was very hard to quickly switch to sort of toddler mode,
Ah,
right? So getting on the floor and playing a really slow game.
yeah.
And I think with adolescents, like they also just need you not to be at 192% all the time. They need sort of presence, even if they don't act like they want your presence. They kind of need you present, paying attention, interested in them, interested in their world, interesting to them, right? Sort of aware of their world and bringing some of that in. That same thing. And sometimes our desire to be sort of doing and racing and doing all that makes it harder to be present, both for the toddler on the floor with the, blocks game, and for the kid who might be having, struggling with something, but looks at you and quickly makes a judgment. She doesn't have time for this right now, so I'm not going to ask. Like, you miss so many opportunities in that. So sort of impatience and busyness, I guess, is a combination.
That's really powerful. Thank you for sharing that because I'm sure I'm doing the same thing. We started off by talking about a girls' weekend I just had, and I use it as a way to ensure that I'm centered enough when the kids come back that they feel they have my full attention. I am getting worse at that over time. And thank you for the
Yeah.
reminder that I have to try my best not to do that anymore.